There is a man who wakes at 5:45. Not by choice. His shift lands at 7. The commute swallows 40 minutes. The coffee beside him lost its heat hours back. He drinks it regardless. Then he squares off a blanket into a tidy fold. He tugs a fresh shirt down over his shoulders. He steps into an office where every face assumes he arrived from a house. He did not. His bed was that sedan, parked 40 feet away, the one they saw him leave the evening before. Stay with that a moment. This man is no cautionary tale. No addiction. No record trailing behind. Nothing collapsed in one dramatic night. He shows up 5 days a week. A wage lands in his account, and that wage cannot rent him a bed. Before you tuck him into the file marked "People Who Stumbled Somewhere," pause. The unsettling thing is not that this exists. It is the face wearing it. And in 2026, that face is not the one you are imagining. Say homeless and a single picture snaps into focus. Canvas under a highway. A silhouette on a freezing curb, remote from anything you know. Real, all of it. That version deserves its own hour of attention. But it is the piece the whole country already watches. My subject lives elsewhere. It runs quieter. It conceals itself with skill. It idles 2 spaces over in the lot, and your eyes slide right past. Watch it from within. Imagine a freight coordinator. Female. A mid-sized firm. 20 years clocked. Every bill cleared the moment it arrives. A trickle into a retirement account on the months that permitted. No luxury in her life. Just footing. By every yardstick this nation issues, she followed the instructions. Then an investment group buys the building beneath her. Paint, fixtures, and a lease that leaps $600 a month. 60 days is what she gets. She scours the area for a match she can shoulder. Empty. The lower-priced units drag waitlists that reach into next year. Her savings exist, sure, but they will not span a deposit plus 2 months up front at this new price. Not while the auto loan and the power bill keep grinding along. So silence. She crams what fits into a rented locker, hands off the remainder, and beds down in the vehicle. 14 days on, she is back at her workstation. The same status meeting. The same table at noon. Nobody seated there suspects a thing. Her story is not the exception. It is the piece that halts people mid-breath. And the tally is grim. One night, January 2024, the count of homeless Americans crossed 770,000. In 12 months, that figure leapt 18%. Nothing higher has ever been logged. The quickest swelling slice of it wears no tent. It drives. Employ people. A portion of them full-time. Plenty holding degrees. Some with children buckled in the rear seat. Some pushing 60, near enough that retirement had begun to take shape in their minds. I have started calling them the vehicle-dwelling workforce. Spotting one is close to hopeless, and the reason is plain. They have grown terrifyingly skilled at passing for you. Consider the labor in that act. Daybreak brings no thought of food. It brings a puzzle. Where is a toilet? A filling station. A burger counter with a 5:30 open. A hospital foyer. A gym unlocking early. That riddle gets cracked before a single other thing could start. Then washing. A fair number of these workers keep a gym membership for exactly one purpose. Never the machines. Somewhere to rinse off ahead of the shift. Outfits cycle by a system filed in strict sequence across the back seat. Wash days bend around the roster. And the entire aim of dawn is to cross that threshold, handing no observer the smallest cue to linger. Here is a detail I cannot shake. The effort of appearing fine is colossal, and it is burned through before the paid hours even open. By the time 9 arrives, this worker has run a compact operation. Hygiene handled. Shelter handled. Concealment handled. The dread of exposure swallowed. Then the ask is to match output for output. The colleague who climbed out of a warm bed. Identical results expected. A starting line galaxies apart, and whoever grades the work suspects none of it. Usually the cover survives. That ranks among the eerier findings. These people vanish in plain sight of those an arm's length away. The desk neighbor is blank. At times, the family is blank, and the concealment has nothing to do with vanity. It bites. People here describe a sharp, particular terror. It hits when they picture word landing on a manager, a client, a child's principal. The stigma reaches past discomfort. It endangers the job. It endangers custody. It endangers every bond propped up by the look of being okay. So the performance rolls on, sunrise after sunrise. Never a break, never a pause, never a beat where the disguise slips and a voice says you can stop now, breathe. Weigh this before we press on. This is the planet's biggest economy. A denser crowd of billionaires than anywhere. Firms valued in the trillions. And within it grows a body of full-timers with no roof to sleep beneath. Most people meet that fact and reach for freak accidents. A stray few chewed up by odd luck. But follow the actual mechanics and the oddness evaporates. Getting from a solid lease to a car seat is disturbingly routine. It follows a script, and the moment that script comes clear, this quits looking like a heap of separate misfortunes. It looks like the reliable yield of a machine that stopped honoring its promise. We will reach the mechanics. First, the twist likely to jolt you hardest. When footage of car-sleeping Americans began jumping across borders online, the response from overseas defied the guests. No one gasped that wealth and poverty share a country. Ancient news. The jolt was the pairing. A steady job. Taxes remitted. Rules obeyed. Every demand a working society makes, met. And no shelter at the end of it. The Dutch viewer left a remark that circulated. Their nation is not wealthy by American measures. But between subsidized housing and tenancy law, a full-time worker slipping into a car there registers as a freak event, not a swelling pattern. A South Korean added a near-identical point. Even with genuine inequality at home, state money pours into housing. So their full-time workers seldom slam into a total absence of options. Then the notes from Australia and Canada carried a different weight. Not remote. Not textbook. Closer to a viewer halfway through a film who realizes the street on the screen mirrors the one past their window. Because this was never a purely American tale. Take Canada. Set against local pay, Vancouver and Toronto rank among the developed world's least reachable housing markets. Canadian outlets have started logging cases of employed people bedding down in cars. Sparse so far. But the curve is tilting. Cross to Australia. It was raised on the ideal of the tidy suburban lot. Yet Sydney and Melbourne have heaved home ownership past what most younger workers can grasp. Rental vacancy there has scraped historic floors for years running. Over in Britain, London tenants surrender a heavier slice of their earnings to housing than almost anywhere. Few major cities on the map run higher. The queue for social housing there gets tallied in years, not months. That same so what keeps recurring across the rich world. So when audiences abroad view lots filling with dozing Americans, they are not observing a foreign trouble. They are previewing their own. The identical strain on rent. The identical stalled pay. The identical fraying of support. Landing on their timeline only a step or two behind. So how does it truly unfold? How does a person doing it all correctly finish with nowhere to lie down? The reply almost never fits the assumption. Most of us conjure one disaster. An abrupt crash you can pin down and label, right there, the fracture. That is not the shape of it. Name it the tightening. And once it clicks, the descent starts to look near certain. Let me open with the part nobody lays out plainly. It hides in the scene between how your money feels and how the bulletins narrate it. You know the sensation. A raise arrives. On paper, welcome. A larger figure drops into the account. Yet half a year later, somehow, the breathing room has shrunk. Not grown. Shrunk. And you ask yourself, under your breath, whether the fault is yours. Whether you simply lack the knack. The knack is not the issue. Here is the real mechanism. Your raise got tethered loosely to the inflation figure on the broadcast. That figure averages a sprawling basket of goods. And it fails to match the inflation your own life absorbs. The prices that surged hardest were never televisions or plane seats. They were the ones with no opt-out. Rent. Food. Insurance. Childcare. The unavoidables. Those outran the neat headline number. So your raise was calibrated to an inflation kinder than your actual week. It did not raise you. It let you float briefly, then eased you back beneath the surface. A raise devoured entirely by climbing essentials is no raise. It is a pay cut in finer tailoring. Nail the math beneath the ache. Across the past decade, rent in a large American city has run up by roughly 40 to 60%. The precise figure hinges on the market. Pay over that identical span crawled far behind. Not frozen. Merely trailing. See what the gap does inside one household ledger. A person surrendering 30% of income to rent back in 2014 could be surrendering 45, even 50% today. That is no change in habits. That is the floor sliding away while they hold perfectly still, spending no more recklessly than before. With half your income feeding rent, virtually nothing can lurch. A repair that will not keep. A hospital charge insurance only partly absorbs. A trimmed week of hours. A housemate who vanishes without warning. For someone with a buffer, any of these is a bruising month. Here, it launches the slide. The deposit cannot be rebuilt. The coming months cannot be met. And the exit seal quicker than you would credit, since the market's low end offered barely any exits to start with. The old release valve has jammed shut as well. In earlier eras, a worker whose numbers refused to balance in a costly city could simply relocate to a gentler one. That route has been narrowing fast. Remote work flooded demand into towns that were once truly affordable. Investment cash trailed it in. The budget mid-sized cities of 15 years back have mostly shed their bargain skin. So have the smaller southern and midwestern hubs and the mountain outposts. And for anyone whose job pins their body to one spot, relocating was never genuinely available. Think building trades, nursing, kitchens, warehouses, so the cushion thins. The absorbers get yanked out. What reigns is a working population perched one event shy of the car. One event. That phrase has slipped into comment threads, into kitchen conversations, into the way regular people now frame their own footing, and it marks a real turn in how folks read their own standing. For most of the previous century, the American middle carried a story about security that compounds. Put in the hours. Bank. A little. Keep steady. Season after season. And it thickened, over time, into something firm underfoot. A home. A retirement. A base that only hardened the longer you occupied it. The bedrock assumption was gap. Space between you and ruin. Air to breathe. The Federal Reserve's own survey now delivers a chillier account. It asks whether people could absorb a surprise $400 cost using cash on hand. Over a third answer no. Roughly 37% would need to borrow, offload something, or plain fail to pay. And inside that group, 13% said they could not cover it by any route at all. Not $4,000. Not a surgical bill. $400. The price of one rough week with the car. Sit with that when the appliance quits. When the dashboard light glows. When the schedule gets clipped. For a household running on no reserve, that is not tension. It is a chain reaction. Certain bills get ranked. Others go unpaid. Penalties gather. The credit score sinks. And a sunken score instantly tightens the housing that stays reachable, precisely when reaching matters most. The apparatus bills you steepest at the exact hour you can least meet it. Trip once and it quietly discounts the next rung down while marking up the climb back. What the figures reveal, and what these workers inhabit, is this. The compounding security model has fractured for an enormous share of the country. No thunderclap. A gradual wearing that most never noticed until they stood inside the fracture. The span still reads as sound. The walkway still feels firm to the soul. But underneath, the supports have quietly corroded for years. And for millions, one gap tells it. From the future they believed they were assembling, to the lot where they now wake. It came down to one or two jolts they had no way to foresee. If this is naming something you have felt but could not label, drop a comment. Say where you are tuning in from. I want to learn whether it squares with what your own streets show. Now the segment most people bypass. It tends to slide into mush or curdle into tribalism. It must do neither. Three forces assembled this over decades. No slogans, only what the ledger records. The first surfaces when housing quits being a place to live and turns into a place to stash capital. Across the last 30 to 40 years, a home migrated for a wide band of the ownership class, from shelter toward asset. That drift shifted into overdrive after the 2008 crash. Hedge funds, private equity, corporate landlords poured into single-family and apartment markets at a scale with no precedent to lean on. And once a house reads as asset first, the arithmetic of affordability inverts. A budget unit yields a slimmer return than a premium one. With nothing shoving hard the other way, capital drifts upward. The low tier gets crushed and the floor drops out. But here I part ways with the standard script. The standard script halts at a villain named greed. And greed is too tidy. Greed is a permanent feature. On its own, it clarifies nothing. The sharper question is why greed found housing so magnetic. And the frank answer is that the rulebook was drafted to make it magnetic. A rental asset carries write-offs an ordinary paycheck will never glimpse. A break on the interest. A break for aging on a structure that is often climbing in worth, not sliding. A provision that lets an owner sell, funnel the whole gain into the next property, and postpone the tax over and over. Bundle those and a house quits contending with other houses. It begins contending with the stock market. And it triumphs, cloaked in perks, a saver parked in a checking account will never brush. None of it descended from the clouds. None of it was conjured by the investors. It was set down clause by legislators. So chase the logic to its end. The investor did not author the game. The investor is the contestant reading the rules right. Hand those exact perks to nearly anyone, and most would move the same way. The rules pay for it and punish the reverse. Which means the fury a lot of people fling at a nameless landlord lands one tier too shallow. The landlord is a symptom. The design is the plot. Faulting the single investor for chasing the incentives is like faulting water for sliding downhill. Dislike where the water gathers and you do not scold the water. You inspect who shaped the grade. And this grade was shaped deliberately in broad daylight by hands that could have shaped it otherwise. The second force is supply. A great many American cities strangled fresh construction with zoning, permit lag, and density ceilings, mostly because the households already holding homes wielded enough local clout to fend off new building near them. A hushed self-interest, entirely lawful, and staggeringly potent. So supply lagged the population, above all in the cities where the jobs actually massed. When supply cannot expand and demand keeps rising, price rises alongside. That is not creed. That is arithmetic. The third force is the slow withdrawal from public housing as a thing the nation opted to fund. There once stood a far larger federal system. Year by year, budget by budget, it contracted. The voucher program built to plug the hole got swamped by need. Today, the main housing assistance program reaches only about 1 in 4 of the households it agrees qualify. Read that twice. Not 1 in 4 applicants clears the line quicker. 1 in 4 of the people the program deems eligible actually receive aid. The remaining 3 qualify and they wait. And in plenty of cities, the wait spans years. Set that atop a nationwide gap of roughly 7.3 million affordable rentals, and the picture quits being a puzzle. Pile the 3 together. Capital treating housing as asset. Supply pinned down. Public backing withdrawn. You do not land a market that is merely tough. You land a market that turns impossible at the base. And that word base carries the weight. When those forces fuse, the hurt does not distribute evenly. People with reserves, robust credit, and income high enough find it pricey but passable. The people a rung and 2 lower find the floor plane gone. The freight coordinator, the part-timer, the freshly single parent. The budget unit they would have cleared a decade back no longer exists. And the unit's still standing perch so far over what they can bear that the gap hardens into a wall. That is no tale of personal choice. That is a result wired into the blueprint. And the people dropping through stood exactly where the blueprint swore the floor would hold. Let me steer this back to the toll. The structure shows how the trap got built. The lives show what it strips from a person. University students are living this at this very hour. Lectures by day. The library until the doors lock. A campus light come nightfall. A handful of schools have begun designating safe overnight spaces and offering a place to shower. Most have not. And those students carry the whole rig alone. They stage an ordinary-looking student life while juggling logistics their peers have never touched. And the parents, newly split, who forfeited the shared lease. A lone income will not spend the rent in their market. So they co-parent out of a vehicle. They hold the routines whole. They guard the illusion that, to their kids, the car stays only ever a car. Never the entire world compressing into 4 doors and a windshield. Then the older workers. This is the cohort that robs me of sleep. Their clock ticks on a different scale. A person in their early 60s knocked off balance is not merely enduring a bad year. They are watching a plan 4 decades in the making split apart at the worst conceivable hour to rebuild. No runway remains to recover the loss. Every dollar that should have quietly compounded toward retirement now vanishes into staying alive this month. And even the ones who did it all right, who cleared a mortgage and banked a pension, are not wholly safe. Inflation does not weigh how disciplined you were. It gnaws a fixed income from below, unhurried, relentless. It bends a comfortable figure into a tight one, and a tight one into a frightening one. The dread once reserved for the young and the broke has climbed upward, into homes that believed the game was already won. Take one of them. A woman, 61. 8 years holding the same small apartment. A spotless history with landlords. A dependable part-time wage. When the building traded hands, her lease simply was not offered again. 90 days to match what she had. She could not. So the SUV became the address. Her job carried on as if nothing had turned. She let almost no one in. No sweeping arc there. No single ruinous slip. A seller who chose to cash out. A market scraped bare at the bottom. And a chasm that split open faster than any effort could close. There is one more piece that scarcely ever surfaces. It may be the heaviest buried cost of the law. Behavioral scientists who examine scarcity sketch something like a levy on the mind. It runs this way. Every person holds a capped ration of mental fuel per day. A finite allowance for choosing, mapping, untangling. And when the car is home, a vast share of that ration combusts on survival before the paid hours even begin. Where sits a safe restroom? Where can the night be spent without a rap on the window at 2 in the morning? What hour does the gym admit you? What path leads from this space to the desk with enough margin to seem untroubled? Pour that volume of energy into staying alive and staying hidden, and slim reserves remain for all the rest. For picking up a skill that might hoist you queer. For pursuing a stronger jump. For being wholly there with the people you love. For plotting past next week. This is no frailty. It is a heavily documented reply to sustained scarcity and strain. It is the brain metering itself beneath pressure. And it decodes the thing outsiders find so puzzling. Why does this person not simply resolve it and scramble out quicker? Because the crisis itself is consuming the mental stock that scrambling out would demand. The snare is not solely financial. It is cognitive. And that is precisely why the fast remedies so rarely stick. It is also why the flimsiest theory of all inverts the science. The one that curls a lip and mutters that these people just cannot handle money. Scarcity does not lay bare a rotten character. Scarcity fabricates the very haze it later gets charged with. Load to nearly anyone that way. Steal their sleep, their privacy, their faith in tomorrow. Their choices road to. Not because they rank lower, because that is what the low performs on the human mind. Whoever declares I would never let this touch me is usually just sketching a cushion they have never lived a day without. If this snaps something into place that had not sat right before, a like genuinely nudges it toward more people. Costs a second, and here the reaction from abroad graduates past a curiosity. It turns into a signal. A viewer in Brazil bumps into one of these stories. Or Japan, or Australia, or Germany, or Canada. The answer is not scorn. They are not deciding that American workers picked foolishly and reaped it. What they keep typing runs nearer to this. I grasp how that could unfold. And frankly, I am unsure it could not unfold on my street. Do not shortchange that pivot. It carries more than the surface shows. For decades, the ruling story around homelessness cast it as personal collapse, addiction, sickness, reckless living. A drift off the rails of grown-up responsibility. That casting gifted everyone a soothing distance. It rendered the unhoused as some separate breed, a mind wired differently, choosing differently at every fork. The vehicle-dwelling workforce erases that distance outright. Because these are not people who wandered off the rails of grown-up responsibility. They are lodged deep in the middle of them, holding jobs, filing taxes, raising children, clearing bills, and still they surface at the very outcome the old myth held for those who had abandoned every bit of it. Once that lands, the old account quits holding. People begin reaching for a truer one. And the conclusion of growing numbers settle on is not that individuals are letting the system down. What actually broke is that the system quietly quit delivering what it once vowed. The equation flipped. Effort has stopped reliably purchasing a stable roof. And that flip is not chance. It is not a bug. It is the stacked consequence of real decisions. Taken in markets. Inked into tax code. Drawn into how cities were zoned and raised. All of it compounding over a long haul. This is where the feeling turns from pity into something tougher to carry. Pity comes cheap. It parks the other person at a comfortable remove. It lets you feel a pulse of something without owing anything. Recognition runs different. That low drop in the gut that whispers I could be there. It charges a fee. It steers you toward the conditions that manufacture the result, rather than a passing sting over the people snared inside it. So what do you do with the whole of this? I refuse to leave you sunken to wait with nowhere to set your hands. You did not raise this system. You cannot dismantle it solo from the couch. But you can decline to be caught unready. And a few concrete moves are worth stating outright. Move 1. Learn your real ratio, not the headline one. Sit down and pin the true slice of your income now feeding housing. If it is creeping toward that 40 or 50% mark, treat it as the alarm it is. Not a private shame to bury. Just data. It tells you how big a jolt you could take before it reaches you. Move 2. Assemble the tiniest possible guard against the $400 problem. Even if it opens at 40. The Fed number frightens precisely because so few hold back cushion. Any space you set between yourself and that ledge is space the machine cannot bill you for down the line. This is not about turning rich. It is about not being the household one repair tips over. Move 3. Shield the single asset scarcity hunts hardest. Your own bandwidth. Put on autopilot whatever you can so fewer choices get made under strain. Because the research is blunt. The instant you fall behind is the instant your judgment gets taxed. And picture a system that answers one late payment with an avalanche of fees. You want to meet that with your head as clear as you can keep it. Move 4 is the one that shifts the grade itself, not just your grip on it. The three forces we trace, the asset logic, the strangled supply, the vanished public backing, were each a decision. Zoning gets settled locally, often by the small handful who bother to attend. The incentives were penned by legislators who can be asked why and on whose behalf. None of it is a law of nature. It got built. Which means it can get built another way. But only if the people it quietly grinds down make one shift. They stop treating it as weather. They start treating it as a design they are allowed to challenge aloud. So what does the whole of this amount to? The crisis of Americans sleeping in cars is real. It is spreading. And it roots in structural trouble that runs far below what most public chatter will concede. The people in those cars tonight are not a bundle of lessons about personal failure. They are a gauge, a reading of the widening canyon between shelter and pay, of a safety net worn to gauze, of the sliver of margin now dividing a dependable working life from a collapse most still trust could never brush them. And elsewhere people are watching, not perched safely above, not smug, carrying a jittery flicker of self-recognition that only sharpens the longer they study their own cities. Because the same pressures are massing on the same heading through Canada, through Australia, through Britain, through wide stretches of Europe, each on its own clock, each with its own guardrails. but along one shared track. What makes this hour bite so hard is who stands at its center, not the figure anyone braced for. They did not drop out of the economy. They did not quit on the bargain. They stayed lodged inside it. They kept turning up. They kept paying in. They kept trusting that consistency would earn stability in return. That trust is now being tested at a scale we have not met. The car is not the plot. The car is only the most visible rim of something far larger. Something building for decades, largely out in the open. It sits inside the rulebooks and marketplaces of a few of the richest nations ever assembled. And one question stays lodged in you once everything settles. The figures, the faces, the quiet daily endurance. What it leaves is plain. Suppose a whole population does all of it. Everything they were promised would carry them. They obey the rules. They turn up. They put in the labor. They clear their debts. And still they land with no reliable place to lay their head. What does that expose about the thing we constructed? And what does it expose about what truly has to shift? Those are not easy questions, but they are the truthful ones. So here is mine for you. If you could mend only one thing first, which lever would you haul? The cost of housing, the size of wages, or the rules that quietly decided who housing is really for? Say it below. I read everyone.